Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to News from the Torah. Today is the 12th day of September 2021 and is the 6th day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei. We just left Rosh Hashanah. We're heading for Yom Kippur, and I'm Leah Roney to talk to you today about preparing yourself for Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, possibly the holiest day of the Jewish year. On Yom Kippur, we spend 25 hours with no food and no drink. We do not wear leather footwear, and we do not wash or use any creams. And of course, we keep all the regular laws of Shabbat. And what we do on this day for 25 hours is pray. It's the Day of Atonement when we can come closest to God, when we are at a level of angels. There are Hasidic masters that say that on Yom Kippur, it's not that we fast. It's just that we really don't eat food. It's a day when we don't eat food and we do live and nourish ourselves by having a connection with God. Obviously, this is just for healthy people. If you're sick or if you're pregnant, get your doctor's input if this is the right time for you to fast. But for everybody else, we're about to go into an amazing experience of closeness to God, of atonement, of coming to God and say, God, I'm sorry I did all these things, but I know you love me because I'm your child. And as a child, I come and say, I'm sorry, I did those things, I didn't mean them. I am not as strong as I think I am. I have had my failings. I will try to really do better in the coming year. So please forgive me. And it is also a time that we come to our friends and family members and we ask for forgiveness for whatever failings we had in the past year. So this whole show is going to be about getting ready for Yom Kippur because really, this is the biggest news in town in the coming week. Our entire year will be sealed on Yom Kippur. So stay put. We'll be right back after these messages with some ideas for your Yom Kippur preparation.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Welcome back. So, as Yom Kippur looms large ahead of us, while Rosh Hashanah is behind us, we are all contemplating about the past year and the year about to come. And this time, especially the days around Yom Kippur, are really full of thoughts on self-improvement and how to change our behavior, how to become better in the coming year. And here is an important principle that the Baal Shem Tov brings that I think is critical for this work. And that is, you are where your thoughts are. Most of us identify with our behaviors, the things we say, and most of us criticize ourselves and find ourselves not being enough. We have such lofty aspirations and find very often that we don't come close to what we want to be. We see ourselves in a certain way, we want to become a certain way. But when we look at who we are in reality, there's just no match. The Baal Shem Tov tells us that this is a completely wrong way to evaluate yourself. You are where your thoughts are. And there's an interesting law, a halacha, from the laws of prayer on Yom Kippur that illustrates that. Every day, every Jew says the prayer of Shema Yisrael. It's the central prayer of Jewish religion. And the second line of that prayer is Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. The name of God's glory will be blessed forever. The law is that this sentence is said quietly under your breath, because only angels can say this prayer out loud. There's one exception to this law, and that is at the start of Yom Kippur, on the eve of Yom Kippur, when we come to synagogue and we just started the service, we say this line out loud. And the question is, this doesn't make any sense. We're just starting Yom Kippur. We're just starting the prayers. We're just starting the Day of Atonement. We haven't done the work of atonement yet. And yet we say this very special line out loud. But at the evening prayer, at the end of Yom Kippur, after a full day of prayer and fasting and atonement, we say this line silently, just like the rest of the year. And this makes no sense. It should be the other way around. At the start of Yom Kippur, we should be saying it silently. And at the end of Yom Kippur, when we're really pure and holy, after a whole day of fasting, that's when we should be saying it out loud. But no. Where are you mentally at the beginning of Yom Kippur? Yes, you just came after a full meal, but your thoughts are on your prayers. Your thoughts are on fasting. Your thoughts are on atonement. You're fully focused on what's lying ahead of you, a day of atonement. And therefore, you are where your thoughts are. On this day, you're like an angel because your thoughts are focused on serving God like an angel without food for a full day. At the end of Yom Kippur, yes, you're pure and you've atoned your sins, and now your thoughts are on the meal that you're about to go eat. So while you have been purified by the day, you're once again in the realm of human beings. So how do we take this concept that you are where your thoughts are, and how do we apply it to serving God? Over the past several years, there have been many experiments done by psychologists that showed that thinking about something or practicing it in your mind is just as effective as doing it in reality. So for example, if you take 3 groups of basketball players, and one group of basketball players just sits on the bench, another group of basketball players actually shoots some hoops, and a third group of basketball players sit and imagine themselves shooting hoops, the 2 latter groups improve their performance similarly. Actually, the ones that imagine themselves shooting hoops might even do a little bit better. So this is another way to show that when we think about things and focus on things deeply, it really affects us. When you sit in your car or at home and you suddenly have a flashback of an experience, especially if it's a traumatic experience, what you're feeling is the same trauma that you felt when you actually experienced that thing. And the same thing about happy thoughts. If you have a flashback to a happy event, you have the emotions in your body that you had during that happy event. So the thoughts we think, the things we focus on, really make us feel as if we're there. And this is what the Baal Shem Tov tells us. The things you focus on, that's the places you go. But it goes deeper than that. The Pesachner Rebbe teaches us that what God really judges us on is on our will. Yes, not just on our actions, but primarily on our will. What is your will? What is it that you actually want? Because your will is just about the only thing you can control. You can control what you want. You can't always control what comes out of it. So let's understand what it means to want something. What is the definition of will? We usually think of will as the things we want, right? I want to get a new job. I want to learn more Torah. I want to spend more time with my kids, my spouse, my friends. I want to pray more. I want to stop speaking negatively about people. I want to have more money. I want to be happy. We think that wanting things will actually make them happen. But that's not what we're saying, because this is not called will. Saying I wish is not will. The Besetzner Rebbe calls that bracha, blessing, or actually wishful thinking. Just sitting on your bench and thinking that you want something is not going to bring it to you, and it's not going to make it happen. So what is real will that God considers and judges us on? That real will, that's called ratzon in Hebrew, is a wish with an action plan attached to it. So for example, I want to get a new job, and therefore I will review my resume and send it to 3 people. I wish I could learn more Torah, and therefore I will join a class. I wish I could spend more time with my kids, my spouse, my friends, and therefore I will schedule a date with this special person once a week, once 2 weeks, once a month. I wish I could pray better, and therefore I will set aside 10 minutes a day to have quiet time to concentrate my thoughts. I wish I would not speak negatively about people, and therefore I will find 3 good things to say about somebody every day. You get the idea. In the past 18 months, we have learned that even best laid plans cause God to laugh. But that doesn't mean we should not be taking action. And that does not mean we should not be planning for the coming year. It does not mean we should be setting our wishes and our wills aside. We should continue to wish for things and to will things. And we should have action plans attached to our wishes, and that we should follow through with. You have done what you can to make it happen. All you can do is wish for something and create an opening by doing an action. And then the results are really up to God. The results are God's responsibility, not yours. If you want to strive for the right thing, well, that means you're doing what God has put you into the world to do, to wish and to strive. Now look back at your will a year ago. Where were your wishes, goals, and action plans? And where are they now? Is your will stronger? Is it more focused? Do you want holier, more important, more altruistic things? Have you actually been able to materialize, to bring into the world any of the things you wished for a year ago? Or were they really wishful thinking? This is the kind of reflection we do on Yom Kippur. Have I become a holier, more godly person by wishing for better things? And I've been able to actualize some of my wishes? If yes, and it doesn't have to be a perfect track record, good for you. You've done good work in this year. You've grown. And it does not matter that you made mistakes along the way. That's part of life. That's how we learn. The important thing is your will, your goals, and your action plans are now better than a year ago. And hopefully they will be even better in a year from now. Give yourself some compassion as you face God on this Yom Kippur. If you have a child or a person you love in your life, how do you feel when somebody speaks badly about that person? It hurts you, right? It hurts God when somebody speaks badly about his children. And certainly we should not be beating ourselves up because we're hurting God. Instead, we should understand that just like we evaluate people close to us, but their will and the actions they take to make their will happen, so does God. So as you're getting ready for Yom Kippur, take out a page. Write down some things you really will for. And write down the action steps you will take in the coming weeks and months to make that happen. This is your card for favorable judgment in Yom Kippur. This is what you're going up with to help God judge you for your will. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Steve Miller.
And I'm Matt Zucker.
Join us for Lighten Up, where we take a look at the week's current events in Israel and from around the Jewish world through a humorous lens.
If you've been paying attention during these crazy times, you know that it's a challenge to parody life anymore. But join Steve and I as we give it the old college try. Not only is being happy an obligation, but life is just too short to take it all so seriously.
So join me, Steve Miller.
And me, Matt Zucker.
For Lighten Up every Monday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Israel, only on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
So this week, I came across a very interesting letter written by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1965. It's a letter that he wrote as a manifesto to the entire Jewish people on the eve of Passover that year. Every year around Passover and then again around Rosh Hashanah, the major holidays, the Rebbe would write a general letter in which he had some ideas about the holiday and what it signified, and especially what it signified for every person in his or her private service of God. And in this letter, the Rebbe states what he saw as a primary problem in contemporary society. And although it was written in 1965, 55 years ago, it really reads as if it was written today. Now, I'm going to preface it by reminding people that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was very well versed in science and technology of his time, and he avidly followed all the scientific developments. He was in contact with top scientists in the world. He had close conversations with some of the NASA scientists, and he really knew what was happening. He was also educated in engineering, having attended universities in Europe before coming to the United States. So the Rebbe was definitely very well versed and had an appreciation for science and technology and progress. And with this in mind, it's really interesting to listen to this letter. So the Rebbe asks a very poignant question. He asked, why does the Torah emphasize that Passover took place in spring? Why is this an important fact? And the usual explanation is that spring has the mildest of climates. It's the most comfortable time. So God chose spring as the time to take the Jewish people out of Egypt so they would have a pleasant walk to the Holy Land. But then he gives a much deeper explanation. And he goes into the nature of Egyptian society to understand why God chose events to unfold in this way. The Rebbe writes that for hundreds of years, around the time that the Jewish people were in Egypt, Egypt was the pinnacle of progress, science, technology, and culture of the ancient world. It wasn't just through its military might that Egypt ruled the world. It ruled the world through its technology and progress, to the extent that Egyptians had two deities, nature and human ability to harness nature. These two were the deities, the central themes of Egypt, to the extent that nature and harnessing nature, the human potential to manage nature became part of Egyptians' pantheon. And how did this happen? Egyptians were able to harness the power of the Nile through artificial irrigation. And they saw this as a pinnacle of human development until that day. So they turned the pharaoh into a deity because Pharaoh was considered to be the most modern, developed man. And the Rebbe says that this was the point of Egypt. That Egypt, you couldn't escape Egypt because Egypt was the pinnacle of culture. It was the pinnacle of progress. And you wanted to be that. You wanted to identify with that to the extent that many, many Jews identified with those values, the values of progress, culture, science, and technology. And once again, it's very important for me to underline that science and progress and technology are wonderful. They're very, very important. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe really encouraged people to continue with the research and the work they did in their respective areas of science and technology. The problem starts when we take these things and we turn them into deities. When nature becomes a god even in of itself, and when we glorify in science and technology in ourselves to the extent that we see science as deity. I'm not anti-science. It's really important. I'm saying this for the third time because people think that the society today is split into people who are pro-science and anti-science. You cannot be anti-science. But science has its limitations. And science cannot be a religion. Technology cannot be a religion. And most importantly, we cannot see people who are involved in science and technology as infallible, as deities. And therefore, I find this letter that he wrote in 1965 to be so poignant because I think that this is where we have been finding ourselves in recent months. We've turned the nature and the virus into this scary thing that rules the world. And we've turned science. And science can be anybody involved in science. It doesn't really matter on which side of the divide they stand or which medication they think is important. Anybody who's involved in science in any way today, we turn them into infallible and we start asking questions. And this is when we think that it is by our might. And once again, our might could be the vaccine, or our might could be a certain anti-corona medicine. Through the strength of our hand and through the might of our mind, we will rule the world. And this is exactly the kind of idolatry that was prevalent in Egypt. And this is exactly the kind of idolatry that Moses came out with when he told the Egyptians, he proclaimed out loud that God rules the world. And then God sent 10 plagues. And the purpose of the plagues was for Egyptians to see that God rules the world and God rules nature on every level, under the earth, on the earth, in the skies, for Egyptians to not know this intellectually, but actually experience the fact that God rules nature and that everything they knew about nature and everything they knew about their own ability to govern nature was overturned. And this is exactly what's happening to us today. I think in the past 18 months, many people have lost faith in how we understand the world and how we expect things to unfold. We hope that things will unfold one way and then they unfold a different way. We put our trust into governments and then they disappoint us. We put our trust into medications and then they disappoint us. Right now in Israel, many of the people who had 2 shots of the vaccine are actually sick, and people thought the vaccine would just give them full protection, and now we're in for a 3rd shot, and the 3rd shot is now controversial in the United States. So everything is upside down. We can't really put our trust into anything 100%. And I don't mean this as a call for anarchy, that everybody should do what they think is right, which is another problem that is happening right now. I'm presenting this as a call for more humility for everybody on both sides of the political divide, on both sides of the vaccine divide. We should all explore this with a little bit more humility and a lot more eye to God. And this, writes the Rebbe, is the reason why the Jewish people were taken out of Egypt in the spring. The spring signifies the time when the entire nature is blooming. And especially at this time when everything in nature is blooming and everything is beautiful and the nature is at its peak, that God says, no. The nature, as beautiful as it is not a God. I am. And please take things in proportion. And what do the Jewish people have to do to be able to free themselves from Egypt? God tells them, take back your hands and take for yourself a lamb and sacrifice it. And this taking back, take yourself back, take your identity back. Take your identity back out of this Egyptian culture, out of this Egyptian belief that man can rule nature and nature and man rule the world. And then bring this lamb as a sacrifice, the lamb being symbolic of spring, of new beginnings in nature. And the Rebbe says it's not enough to do this in the privacy of your home. You actually have to state what you believe publicly. And I think if we would spend 1/10 of the time and effort that was spent on pointless debates, pro and against politics and different medical interventions, if we would spend 1/10 of our effort on reminding ourselves and our loved ones that in the end, God rules the world, and whatever we decide to do on the practical level, we should remember that that is just our effort. In reality, it is God who decides what's going to happen. Either way, if we would just invest 1/10 of the effort, I think we would bring so much more godliness and holiness and beauty into the world. So the next time you go out on social media or have friends meet, think about the conversation and maybe take 1 minute to discuss the fact that it's not the virus and it's not the various medical interventions that are going to decide how this whole story is going to come out. It's God's doing. And we just have to have the humility to try to play our part. Stay tuned for the last part of this show.
Are you tired of political correctness and the fear that you might offend someone?
I'm not afraid to offend you.
Wow, look who's talking tough.
One has to be tough to keep sane today.
Hi, I'm Alan Skorsky.
And I'm Bela Seabrow.
And join us every Wednesday for The Definitive Wrap as we interview the most sought-after guests and expose progressive trends that masquerade as enlightenment but actually destroy our freedoms.
We are the No Woke Zone, so buckle up to this exciting show.
Buckling up, but I'm driving.
Sure, you can drive, but I'm the navigator.
Tune in for the No Nonsense, The Definitive Wrap Show, every Wednesday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back. So, as we are wrapping up the show that is really all about Yom Kippur, I want to talk about one side of Yom Kippur that is sometimes ignored. Yom Kippur is a day of atonement when God atones our sins and misdeeds of the previous year, and we now have a clean slate to go with into the new year. With a caveat to that. On Yom Kippur, God only atones sins between man and God. the things that you did wrong and violated God's will, those are the things that God atones on Yom Kippur. But God does not atone sins between man and man until we receive the person's forgiveness. And therefore it is so important to take these 3-4 days we have till Yom Kippur to really think and search, is there somebody that we have wronged one way or another? Is there somebody whose forgiveness we have to ask for? And sometimes we do things unintentionally and we hurt people anyway. And there's a beautiful line that author Susan Scott uses, that you aren't responsible for your wake. When a boat rides through a lake, there are ripples left by the boat. That's called the wake. And in life, through our actions, we all leave a wake. And it's easy to say, well, that person, she's just too sensitive. That's possible. It's possible that she's too sensitive and it's really not your problem. But I think if we were a little bit more mindful of the domino effect that we create in the world, it will be a better place for everybody. So before you can go into Yom Kippur and ask God for forgiveness, it's important to think about the people who you might have wronged or who you might have a falling out with during the previous year and the years before. And it doesn't really matter who was right or wrong. What matters is that we have as much peace as possible. It is said that when there is somebody that you can't have a conversation with, that when you see them or they see you or they cross to the opposite side of the street, somebody you wouldn't say hello to, that's called hate. And maybe you don't hate them in your heart, but if you can't have a conversation with them, that's called hate. And God hates it when people hate each other. It's literally the opposite of what He wants in the world. So it doesn't really matter who started it. The important thing is that you make amends. And it could be very easy, especially during this time when people's hearts are open and people expect apologies and people are willing to forgive and forget. I had an incident with somebody in my community a few years ago when her dog scratched my daughter. And my daughter actually had blood come out. So because of the danger of rabies, which is a deadly disease, and it does happen in Israel, our family doctor told us to contact the Ministry of Health. And the standard procedure is that the dog is quarantined for 2 weeks to see how it's doing. And if after 2 weeks everything's okay, then the dog is released and the child is fine. And if the dog shows signs of rabies, then the child is vaccinated. So we followed this advice and we went to the Ministry of Health and we reported the incident. And sure enough, the county veterinarian came and quarantined the dog. And then this person in my community was so upset that I quote-unquote snitched on their dog and that their dog would be vaccinated and their dog would not come back alive from vaccination. And she was just so upset with me. She wouldn't talk to me for quite a few weeks, actually months after that. So I know I'm right. I know that the life of my child, even when faced with the possibility of a very serious, possibly lethal disease, is more important than the welfare of the dog. And still, there's something unhealthy when there's somebody who doesn't talk to you in your community. So on the eve of Yom Kippur, I knocked on this person's door on my way to the synagogue and said, look, we had a falling out and I'm sorry about it. I'm sorry about my part and I hope we can put this behind us. And that was it, and I left. And then an interesting thing happened. A few days later, our paths crossed and she smiled at me and we had a conversation. And, it's been a few years since then and we're totally fine. Now, once again, I know I'm not responsible. I'm not taking any blame. I know I did the right thing. But I also know that peace is more important than being right. And really, knocking on her door and saying those things took 2 minutes. It didn't make me any less of a person. It didn't make me any less respected. in my eyes or in her eyes, but it did pave a way for us to have peace. And it's a simple thing to do if we just put our ego aside. And our ego is really not real. It's a figment of our imagination. What will people think of me, but I'm right and she's wrong? Who cares? Who cares if she's right and you're wrong or the other way around? The important point is to have peace. Now, it's important to qualify that because there's some manipulative people who are narcissistic and not emotionally healthy. And they will use guilt to guilt you into various situations when you're totally not responsible. So when I'm not talking about those kinds of people, those are the kinds of people who have to have very strict boundaries. And you have to have very strict boundaries for yourself and for them. And with those kinds of people, you really have to think twice. What's the right way to approach them or not approach them or to keep them at arm's distance? But not everybody around us is narcissistic. And not everybody around us is emotionally healthy. Actually, most people are okay. They just make mistakes of judgment. And sometimes they get upset over things and they don't think twice. And sometimes they also get caught up in their egos. So for those regular folks who make their mistakes and then don't always know how to come out of them, you be the one to take the first step. It doesn't really matter. And it's so easy. We say this to our kids all the time. You had a fight with your friend. You said some things you didn't mean to. She said some things she didn't mean to. Be the first to stretch your hand out and make peace. And God loves that. And when we have the ability to put our ego aside and to make the first step to make amends, God also judges us favorably because He understands we're not putting our ego in the middle. We're putting Him and His wishes for peace in the middle. So as you're trying to create favorable judgment for yourself on this Yom Kippur, take a few minutes to think of the people with whom you might have had some falling outs. And it happens so fast on social media. People get so defensive and so upset and so personal on social media, even with people they know. It's a good time to write a short apology or a short, I know we had our differences, let's put them aside and start anew. And here's what I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about a blanket post of, to anybody I might have heard this year, I'm sorry. No, that doesn't really do anything. Really take the time to send that personal note. It's 2 or 3 lines. It's 2 minutes of your time. But it can help somebody heal a hurt. And it can help you restore relationships you've had that soured. And really, you will be the biggest beneficiary. Because God will judge you favorably. But also people will respect your ability, your courage to be the first to make amends. And I'm going to say this once again, it's important not to misplace this with people who are manipulative, who use guilt to guilt trip you into things that they want. Those kinds of people are a separate story. And you should definitely not be taking any abuse from anybody and certainly not apologizing for them abusing you. That's something that happens in abusive situations. And if you are in an abusive situation, please leave and get help. But for everybody else who is just having the differences with friends, find ways to make amends. And especially in families. Our families are hard. Our families are tough. People in families are very close. They take things personally with their parents, with their kids, with their in-laws, with their siblings. Especially families need peace. There's probably no greater value in Judaism than peace in the family. Once again, not talking about abusive situations, not talking about unhealthy families. Normal families that have their differences. There's no greater value than having peace in the family to the extent that God allows for His name to be erased, to return peace to a family. Is there a family member? Is there a friend? Is there a neighbor? A colleague? A client? A vendor? that you have had a falling out with. Find a way to make peace there. So with these words, I would like to once again wish you a very meaningful fast and a meaningful Yom Kippur. I want to ask your forgiveness if I have said something or done something that has caused you hurt. And I'm asking you, if that's the case, to please contact me through the channel so I could make amends personally. May this year bring a lot of health, prosperity, happiness to the entire world and to each and every one of you personally. And may this be the year that God's glory is revealed for everybody to see. Have a great week, have a meaningful Yom Kippur, and I will see you on the other side just before the holiday of Sukkot. Bye-bye now.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom!
Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling for the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.